In the towering world of the ultra-rich, some men believe they are gods. This is the story of a man who thought his billion-dollar empire gave him the right to crush anyone he deemed insignificant. During a dinner service at an elite Manhattan restaurant, he set his sights on a quiet waitress. To amuse his guest, he began to humiliate her in German, a language he thought was his private shield. It was a fatal miscalculation. That language was her mother tongue, and she was about to turn his cruel words into a weapon that would dismantle his arrogance and threaten his entire world. The air in Aurelia, a 3-Michelin-star sanctuary nestled in Manhattan's Upper East Side, was different. It wasn't just filtered, it was curated. It smelled of money, a subtle perfume of aged leather from the banquettes, a whisper of white truffle from the kitchen, and the faintest, sharpest note of expensive, unapologetic perfume. For the patrons, this was an escape. For Anya Schmidt, it was a gilded cage where she performed a nightly ballet of service for a wage that barely touched the sides of her mother's mounting medical bills. Tonight was a Tuesday, typically a slower, more civilized evening. Anya moved with an economy of motion that bordered on art. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe, immaculate bun. Her uniform, a crisp black blouse and tailored trousers, was spotless. There was a quiet dignity about her, a stillness in her dark blue eyes that seemed to observe everything and reveal nothing. Most patrons saw her as part of the decor, efficient, silent, and invisible. It was a role she had perfected out of necessity. She carried a tray of glistening water glasses to table 7, her mind 1,000 miles away, calculating exchange rates and pharmaceutical costs. Her mother, back in a quiet town in Vermont, needed a new course of experimental treatment. The insurance called it elective. Anya called it survival. Every dollar she earned, every punishingly polite smile she offered, was a coin dropped into a well of hope that felt terrifyingly deep. At 8:15 p.m., the heavy oak doors of Aurelia swung open, and a palpable shift occurred in the atmosphere. It was as if the restaurant's carefully balanced ecosystem had been disturbed by the arrival of a predator. 2 men entered. The first, trailing, slightly behind, was a portly, nervous-looking man in his late 50s, with a face that seemed permanently flushed. This was Gerhard Müller. The man he followed, however, was the one who sucked the air from the room. He was Damien Rochester. His name wasn't just known, it was a brand, a verb, a threat. CEO of Ethelred Analytics, the data mining behemoth that knew what you wanted to buy before you did, predicted elections with chilling accuracy, and whose ethical boundaries were a subject of constant nervous debate in global financial circles. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a custom-tailored suit, the color of a stormy sea, and his features were sharp, almost violently handsome. His eyes, a pale, icy gray, swept the room, not with appreciation, but with assessment, as if he were calculating the net worth of every diner and finding them wanting. The maître d', a seasoned veteran named Jean-Pierre Dubois, who had seated presidents and royalty without batting an eye, seemed to shrink by an inch. "Mr. Rochester, an honor. Your usual table is ready." Damien didn't respond. He simply strode towards the best table in the house, a secluded corner booth with a panoramic view of the city lights, and slid onto the leather banquette. Gerhard Müller scurried in after him. It was Anya's section. A knot of ice formed in her stomach. She had served difficult customers before, narcissistic actors demanding socialites' boorish hedge fund managers. But Damien Rochester was different. She had read about him. His reputation for corporate savagery was legendary. He didn't just fire people. He annihilated their careers, salting the earth so nothing could ever grow there again. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she approached the table. "Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Anja, and I will be taking care of you tonight. May I start you with some water, still or sparkling?" Damien didn't even look at her. He was scrolling through his phone, his thumb moving with ruthless efficiency. He answered without looking up, his voice a low, dismissive baritone. "Sparkling, San Pellegrino, and make sure it's cold, not restaurant cold." Actually cold. Gerhard Müller offered a weak, apologetic smile. "And a still for me, please, miss." "Of course," Anja said, her voice perfectly even. As she turned to leave, Damien's voice cut through the air again, still not looking at her. "And bring the wine list. Don't send the sommelier. I don't have time for a lecture." Anja retrieved the water and the heavy leather-bound wine list. When she returned, Damien was speaking to Gerhard, his voice low and intense. She poured the water with a steady hand, placing the bottles precisely in the center of the table. Damien finally put his phone down and picked up the wine list, flipping through it with an air of profound boredom. He stabbed a finger at a page. "We'll have this. The 2005 Echezot Grand Cru. See if you can decant it without ruining it." Anja nodded. "An excellent choice, sir." It was a $4,000 bottle of wine, her entire monthly take-home pay on a good month. The casual way he ordered it felt like a physical blow. She procured the wine from the cellar, presented the bottle for his approval. He waved it away with an impatient flick of his wrist and began the decanting process at the tableside cart. It was a delicate ritual, one she normally enjoyed, but under his cold gaze, every movement felt scrutinized. He watched her like a hawk, his grey eyes missing nothing. She could feel his disdain, his judgment. To him, she was just a pair of hands, a functionary. As she poured the final drop into the crystal decanter, he spoke again, this time to Gerhard, but loud enough for her to hear clearly. "It's amazing, isn't it? The pretensions of these places. They teach them a few fancy moves, give them a uniform, and they think they have a profession." Gerhard chuckled nervously. "Ah, yes, Damien." "Quite." Anja's jaw tightened, but her face remained a mask of placid professionalism. She placed a small taste of the wine in Damien's glass. He swirled it, sniffed it with an exaggerated flourish, and took a sip. He held the wine in his mouth for a long moment before swallowing. "Passable." He conceded, then gestured for her to pour for Gerhard. The rest of the meal unfolded under a similar cloud of tension. Damien Rochester was the kind of customer who reveled in creating discomfort. He sent back the breadbasket because the crust wasn't audibly crisp enough. He complained that his appetizer, a delicate seared scallop dish, was plated with the components a few millimeters off-center from how he'd seen it in a magazine. Each complaint was delivered with a weary sigh, as if the incompetence of the world was a personal burden he was forced to carry. Anja handled each issue with unshakable calm, replacing adjusting and apologizing without a hint of emotion. Inside, however, a slow fire was building. She recognized his type all too well. Men who built their empires on the assertion of dominance, for whom every interaction was a negotiation of power. Her past was littered with the ghosts of men like him. The main course arrived. Damien had ordered the slow-roasted duck with a cherry reduction sauce. Anja placed the plate before him. It was a work of art. The skin was a perfect mahogany brown, glistening under the soft light. Damien stared at it for a full 10 seconds. He picked up his fork and knife, and then he did something that made Anja's blood run cold. He switched languages. He turned to Gerhard, and in fluent, cutting German began his assault. "Schau dir das an, Gerhard," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Look at this. They call this haute cuisine. The duck is probably overcooked, and I'd bet my shares the sauce came from a jar." Gerhard, now on his third glass of wine, played along. Ja, es ist immer dasselbe. Man zahlt ein Vermögen für die Show. Yes, it's always the same. You pay a fortune for the show. Anya stood perfectly still by the table as protocol dictated, waiting to be dismissed. She kept her eyes fixed on a point on the far wall. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, but her expression remained serene. She had grown up in Berlin, the daughter of an American diplomat and a German art historian. German wasn't a language she had learned. It was the language of her childhood lullabies, her first secrets, her first heartbreak. It was as much a part of her as the color of her eyes. Damien poked at the duck, then looked up, not at Gerhard, but directly at Anya. He assumed with the supreme arrogance of the powerful that she was just part of the scenery, a non-entity who couldn't possibly understand his privileged world or his privileged language. He decided to make her the punchline. "Sieh sie dir an," he said, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. She just stands there. Not a single thought behind those empty eyes. Probably dreaming of her tips so she can pay the rent on her squalid little apartment in Queens. She has no idea we're talking about how utterly pathetic her existence is. Gerhard shifted uncomfortably. This was a step too far even for him. Damien, maybe Damien, cut him off his voice, growing louder, more performative. He was enjoying this. Er gestuert Anja with his fork. Nein, das ist das Faszinierende am amerikanischen Servicepersonal. Diese Leere, diese völlige Abwesenheit von Ehrgeiz oder Intellekt. Man könnte ihr das Komplexeste aus der Quantenmechanik erklären, und alles, was sie hören würde, wäre bla bla bla, noch mehr Wasser. Sie ist ein Automat, ein hübscher, aber nutzloser Automat. No, this is what's fascinating about American service staff. This emptiness, this total absence of ambition or intellect. You could explain the most complex aspects of quantum mechanics to her, and all she'd hear is, blah blah blah, more water. She's an automaton. A pretty, but useless automaton. The insult hung in the air, thick and vile. He was talking about her as if she were a piece of furniture, an object. He had stripped her of her humanity right there in the middle of the crowded restaurant, cloaked in a language he thought was his shield. Anya didn't flinch. She didn't cry. The fire inside her, which had been smouldering all evening, now roared into an inferno. The years of swallowing her pride, of hiding her past, of enduring condescension for the sake of a paycheck, it all coalesced into a single sharp point of clarity. She let him finish. She allowed the silence to settle for a beat to let his vile words fully land. Gerhard was staring at his plate, his face beet red. Damien was looking at her expectantly, a glint of sadistic triumph in his eyes. He was waiting for her to scurry away in confused humiliation. She did not. Instead, she lowered her gaze from the far wall and met his eyes directly. The stillness in her own eyes was gone, replaced by a glacial fire. And then she spoke. Her voice was low, calm, and perfectly modulated. She responded not in the casual German he had been using, but in crisp, formal, academic, High German, the Hochdeutsch of universities and boardrooms. "Entschuldigen Sie die Störung, mein Herr," she began. "Forgive the interruption, sir." The blood drained from Damien Rochester's face. His smirk froze, then evaporated. Gerhard Müller physically jerked back in his seat, his eyes wide with disbelief. Anya continued her voice, never wavering, each word a perfectly crafted icicle. "Aber Ihr Urteil ist nicht nur unhöflich, sondern auch faktisch falsch. But your judgment is not only rude, it is also factually incorrect." She took a small, deliberate step closer to the table. "Was den Ehrgeiz betrifft," she said, her eyes locked on his, "so ist es ein gewisser Ehrgeiz, der eine Person dazu bringt, eine 60-Stunden-Woche in einem körperlich anstrengenden Job zu arbeiten, um die medizinische Versorgung eines Familienmitglieds zu finanzieren. Eine Situation, die durch ein räuberisches Gesundheitssystem verschärft wird, das von Leuten wie Ihnen oft als effizienter Markt verteidigt wird. Regarding ambition, it takes a certain kind of ambition to work a 60-hour week in a physically demanding job to fund a family member's medical care, a situation exacerbated by a predatory healthcare system, often defended as an efficient market by people like you. Damien was speechless. He looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. She wasn't finished. She gestured gracefully towards his plate. Was den Intellekt betrifft so, erfordert es keinen Quantenphysiker, um die Maillard-Reaktion zu verstehen, die für die perfekt gebräunte Haut dieser Ente verantwortlich ist. Oder die chemische Zusammensetzung der Anthocyane in der Kirschsoße, die ihr die tiefrote Farbe verleihen. Aber es erfordert ein grundlegendes Maß an Anstand, diese Dinge nicht vor der Person zu beleidigen, die sie ihnen serviert. As for intellect, one doesn't need to be a quantum physicist to understand the Maillard reaction responsible for the perfectly browned skin on that duck, or the chemical composition of the anthocyanins in the cherry sauce that give it its deep red color. But it does require a basic level of decency not to insult those things in front of the person serving it to you. Finally, she delivered the killing blow. Her voice dropped even lower, becoming a confidential, devastating whisper. Und was meine angebliche Lehre oder meinen Wert als Automat betrifft, vielleicht verwechseln Sie Stille mit Dummheit, weil in Ihrer Welt Lärm gleichbedeutend mit Macht ist. Aber lassen Sie mich Ihnen versichern, Herr Rochester, einige der komplexesten und gefährlichsten Programme laufen völlig geräuschlos im Hintergrund. Sie bemerken sie erst, wenn das ganze System abstürzt. And as for my supposed emptiness, or my value as an automaton, perhaps you mistake silence for stupidity, because in your world noise equates to power. But let me assure you, Mr. Rochester, some of the most complex and dangerous programs run completely silently in the background. You don't notice them until the entire system crashes. She held his gaze for one more second, letting the full weight of her words settle in the suffocating silence. Then her professional mask slipped perfectly back into place. "Enjoy your meal, sir," she said in flawless, unaccented English, and with that, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving Damien Rochester staring after her, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. The predator had become the prey. The system had just crashed. The immediate aftermath of Anya's response was a vacuum of sound. The low murmur of the restaurant seemed to have receded, leaving Table 7 in an isolated pocket of stunned silence. Damien Rochester sat bolt upright, his fork forgotten in his hand. The color had not returned to his face. He looked like a marble statue, cold and pale. The calculated cruelty in his eyes had been replaced by something far more volatile, a chaotic mixture of fury, humiliation, and disbelief. Gerhard Müller looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. He kept darting panicked glances between Damien Anya's retreating back and the exit, as if plotting the fastest escape route. He had witnessed Damien verbally eviscerate board members, ruin competitors with a single phone call, and intimidate politicians. He had never not once seen anyone talk back to him, let alone dismantle him so completely, so clinically. Anya walked directly to the service station, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Adrenaline surged through her veins, hot and sharp. Her hands were trembling slightly, so she clasped them behind her back. She had done it. She had finally broken her own rule of invisibility. The satisfaction was exhilarating, but it was immediately followed by a wave of cold dread. What had she just done? She hadn't just insulted a customer. She had declared war on Damien Rochester. From across the room she could see him slowly lowering his fork. His jaw was clenched so tightly, a muscle pulsed violently in his cheek. He said something to Gerhard, his voice too low to hear, but the tone was venomous. Then he raised his hand and snapped his fingers, a sharp, imperious sound that cut through the dining room. Jean-Pierre Dubois, the maître d', was at his side in an instant, his face a mask of professional concern. "Is everything all right, Mr. Rochester?" Damien didn't look at Dubois. His icy grey eyes were fixed on Anya. "No." He bit out the single word laden with menace. "Everything is not all right. I want that waitress fired. Now." Dubois' professional smile faltered. He glanced from Damien's thunderous expression to Anya, who stood her ground by the service station, her face calm and unreadable. "Sir, perhaps there has been a misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding," Damien snarled, his voice rising. A few diners at nearby tables began to look over. "That woman was insolent, unprofessional, and I want her gone. Is that simple enough for you to understand? Or is everyone in this establishment incompetent?" Dubois, caught between the wrath of his most powerful client and the integrity of his staff, looked deeply uncomfortable. He walked over to Anya. "Anya, what happened?" He whispered, his French accent thick with anxiety. Before Anya could reply, Damien was on his feet. He strode over to them, his height and presence dominating the space. He got right in Anya's face, close enough for her to see the flecks of silver in his stormy eyes. "You think you're clever, don't you?" He hissed, his voice, a low, dangerous growl for her ears only. "You think that little parlor trick with the language means something you are nothing. A speck. I will have you out on the street before you can even collect your pathetic tips." Anya met his gaze without flinching. "I simply responded to the comments you made about me, Mr. Rochester." "What comments?" he scoffed, turning to Dubois. "She's delusional. She's making things up." This was the moment Gerhard Müller chose to intervene, though it was less an act of courage and more one of self-preservation. He had finally processed the scene, and a terrifying thought, a flicker of a memory, was taking shape in his mind. The name Anya, the face, those intelligent, defiant blue eyes, the perfect academic German. It couldn't be. But "Damien," Gerhard said, approaching them cautiously. He was sweating profusely now. "Damien, let's just go. We can discuss this later." "We will not just go," Damien shot back, not taking his eyes off Anya. "I want her name. Her full name. I'm going to make sure she never works in this city again, not even as a dishwasher." Dubois wrung his hands. "Sir, I cannot. Her name, Anya," said her voice, clear and steady, "is Anya Schmidt." The name hit Gerhard Müller like a physical blow. He stumbled back a step, his face turning from red to ashen. The flicker of memory ignited into a full-blown inferno of recognition. Anya Schmidt. The Anya Schmidt. He grabbed Damien's arm this time with genuine force. "Damien, we need to leave. Right now!" His voice was tight with panic. Damien finally turned, irritated by his subordinate's insistence. "What is wrong with you, Gerhard?" "That name," Gerhard whispered, frantically pulling him a few feet away, trying to create an illusion of privacy. "Schmidt. Damien, think. The Labyrinth Project. MIT. 5 years ago." Damien stared at him, his anger momentarily replaced by confusion. The Labyrinth Project had been a groundbreaking multi-million-dollar research initiative into ethical AI and predictive behavior algorithms. It had imploded in a massive scandal. "What about it?" Damien snapped. "The whistleblower." Gerhard breathed, his eyes wide with horror, as he glanced back at Anya, who was now being spoken to quietly by a distressed Dubois. The lead researcher. The prodigy they all said would change the world. The one who exposed the data misused the back doors. Her career was destroyed. They said she fabricated her findings. She was discredited, blacklisted everywhere. Her name. It was Anya Schmidt. The revelation landed on Damien Rochester like a ton of bricks. He slowly turned his head and looked at Anya again. He wasn't looking at a waitress anymore. The uniform, the restaurant, the context, it all melted away. He was seeing her now. The sharp intelligence in her eyes. The unshakable composure under fire. The way her German was not just fluent, but precise and academic. It all clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening thud. This wasn't some random, clever waitress. This was a fallen titan from his own industry, a ghost from a cautionary tale whispered in tech circles. And he, Damien Rochester, had just stood in a 3 Michelin-star restaurant and called her a pretty but useless automaton, with not a single thought behind those empty eyes. The humiliation he felt moments ago was nothing compared to the complex, toxic cocktail now flooding his system. It was fury at being made a fool of. It was a flicker of professional fear. This woman knew things, real things, about the dark underbelly of his world. And most potently, it was a surge of predatory interest. The game had just changed. He wasn't trying to crush a fly anymore. He had stumbled upon a wounded lioness. His entire demeanor shifted. The hot rage cooled into something far more dangerous. Cold, calculating focus. He straightened his suit jacket and walked back to Jean-Pierre Dubois. His voice was now unnervingly calm. "Mr. Dubois," he said smoothly, "there's been a terrible misunderstanding. It seems your staff member and I had a spirited debate. My associate and I will be leaving now. Please put the entire bill, including the wine, on my corporate account." He then looked past Dubois to Anya. His eyes held a new, chilling light. It was a look of assessment of a predator sizing up a worthy opponent. "My apologies for the scene." The apology was so devoid of warmth, it was more menacing than his anger had been. Without another word, he turned and strode out of the restaurant, Gerhard Müller practically tripping over himself to follow. The moment they were gone, the tension in the room broke. Jean-Pierre Dubois let out a long, shaky breath and turned to Anya. "In all my years," he said, shaking his head, "I have never seen anything like that. Anya, are you all right?" "I'm fine, Jean-Pierre," she said, though her legs now felt weak. "What you did was magnificent." He admitted a glimmer of admiration in his eyes. "But Anya, it was Damien Rochester. You know who he is." "I do," she said quietly. "I cannot protect you from him," he said, his voice filled with genuine regret. "His company holds the lease on this entire building. He is our landlord. If he wants you gone—" He trailed off, the implications clear. "I understand," Anya said, the cold dread returning with a vengeance. She had won the battle, a spectacular, fiery victory, but she knew with sickening certainty that she had just started a war. She had no resources to fight. She looked around the gilded cage of Aurelia at the wealthy diners, oblivious to the life-altering drama that had just unfolded. She had unmasked herself, and in doing so, she had painted a target on her back for the most ruthless man she had ever met. The brief, sweet taste of vindication was already turning to ash in her mouth. The fallout was swift and silent. There was no dramatic firing in front of the staff, no shouting match in the manager's office. The following afternoon, Anya received a call from Jean-Pierre Dubois. His voice was heavy with an apology that felt both sincere and utterly useless. "Anya, my hands are tied," he said, the strain evident in his voice. "The call came from the building's ownership group this morning. Not from Rochester himself, of course. It was a lawyer. They said an unstable employee had created a customer-facing disturbance. They recommended termination to avoid any potential liabilities. He didn't even have to ask you to fire me, Anya stated, her voice flat. He just squeezed. He owns the air we breathe in this place, Dubois confirmed grimly. I'm so sorry. I've prepared your final paycheck and a severance, a generous one. It's the least I can do. Thank you, Jean-Pierre, Anya said the words, feeling hollow. It wasn't your fault. She hung up the phone and stared out the window of her small, meticulously clean apartment in Washington Heights. It wasn't Queens, as Damien had so scornfully guessed, but it might as well have been a different planet from his world. The severance was a kind gesture, but it was a band-aid on a gaping wound. It would cover her mother's medical bills for a month, maybe 2. After that, she would be back to square one, only now she was unemployed and had likely earned a powerful, vindictive enemy. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety. Anya applied for jobs at other high-end restaurants, but a strange pattern emerged. She would get an interview, it would go wonderfully, and then a day or 2 later, she'd receive a polite, generic rejection email. After the 4th time, she knew. Rochester wasn't just getting her fired from Aurelia, he was salting the earth just as his reputation suggested. His influence in the rarefied world of New York's elite hospitality was a silent, invisible web, and she was caught in it. Desperation began to creep in. She started looking at admin jobs, data entry, anything that could pay the bills. The thought of returning to that world, even at the lowest rung, was a bitter pill. Her spectacular implosion 5 years ago had been public and brutal. The Labyrinth project had been her life's work. She had discovered that the ethical AI protocols, the very heart of the project, were being bypassed. A hidden back door allowed the raw, deeply personal user data the AI was learning from to be siphoned off to an unknown third party. When she raised the alarm, the project's corporate sponsors, a powerful consortium of tech investors, turned on her. They launched a vicious smear campaign, producing fabricated evidence that suggested she was the one trying to steal the data. They painted her as a disgruntled, unstable researcher. Her mentor, the esteemed Professor Alistair Finch, who had initially supported her, buckled under the pressure and publicly disavowed her claims. She was left isolated, her reputation in tatters, her career a smoking crater. She had retreated from that world, completely burying Anya Schmidt, the AI prodigy, and becoming Anya, the invisible waitress. Now her past and present had collided, leaving her future in jeopardy. Meanwhile, in a sterile, glass-walled office overlooking Central Park, Damien Rochester was becoming obsessed. The incident at Aurelia had unsettled him more than he cared to admit. It wasn't just the public humiliation. It was the shock of his own miscalculation. He, a man whose entire fortune was built on accurately predicting human behavior, had made the most fundamental error. He had judged a book by its cover. Find me everything on her, he had commanded his head of security, a grim, efficient man named Kane. Not the public record. I want the real story, who she talks to, where her money goes, every weakness. Kane was good at his job. Within 48 hours, a detailed dossier was on Damien's desk. It contained everything Anya's stellar academic record at MIT, the glowing articles written about her before her fall, and the brutal details of the Labyrinth scandal. It also contained her current, desperate reality, the apartment in Washington Heights, the precise details of her mother's illness, a rare form of early-onset dementia, the mounting, crippling debt from a Swiss clinic providing the only treatment that seemed to slow the disease's progression. Damien read the file twice. The information about her mother was the key, a vulnerability, a lever. Most men would feel a twinge of pity. Damien felt a surge of strategic clarity. He saw a way to reassert his dominance, to put this ghost back in her box. He called his personal lawyer. "Draft a settlement agreement for an Anya Schmidt," he instructed, his voice cold and precise. "A non-disclosure agreement of the most restrictive kind. It will cover any and all interactions between myself and Ms. Schmidt, past, present, and future. In exchange for her signature, we will make a one-time payment of, let's say, $250,000. It was a fortune to Anya. It was pocket change to him. "And send it via a courier," he added. "I don't want it to be traceable back to my personal office." He wanted to control the narrative, to make it seem like an impersonal corporate gesture, to silence a nuisance, not a personal act of war. It was a test. He would offer her a cage, a comfortable one, but a cage nonetheless. If she took it, he won. She would be just another person who could be bought. A week after her firing, as Anya was staring at a pile of bills on her small kitchen table, a sleek black envelope arrived, delivered by a silent courier. There was no return address. Inside, she found the legal document and a cashier's check for $250,000 payable upon the signing of the enclosed NDA. She read the terms of the agreement. It was suffocating. It forbade her from ever speaking about the incident at Aurelia, about Damien Rochester or his business. It even had a clause preventing her from working in any field where she might leverage information about Ethelred Analytics or its executive team, effectively a lifetime ban from her own area of expertise. It was hush money, designed not just to buy her silence, but to erase her potential as a threat. She stared at the check. That amount of money would change everything. It would pay for her mother's treatment for years. It would give her breathing room security. All she had to do was sign her name to agree to stay invisible to let him win. The temptation was immense, a siren song of relief from the crushing weight of her responsibilities. She was agonizing over the decision, the check lying on her table like a cursed object, when her laptop pinged with a new email. The subject line was simple: a conversation. The sender's name was Isabella Rossi, CEO of Nexus Dynamics. Anya's breath caught in her throat. Nexus Dynamics was the biggest rival to Ethelred Analytics. While Damien's company was known for its aggressive, borderline unethical approach to data, Nexus, under Rossi's leadership, had carved out a niche as the ethical alternative, focusing on transparent AI and user privacy. Isabella Rossi was a legend in her own right, one of the few women to have reached the pinnacle of the tech world, and she was Damien Rochester's fiercest competitor. The email was brief. "Dear Ms. Schmidt, word travels in strange ways in our small world. I was recently told a story about a confrontation in a restaurant. It was a story about dignity and an unexpected command of the German language. I've followed your early work on the Labyrinth project for years. I was and remain an admirer. I always believed there was more to the story of its demise. If you are open to it, I would like to meet. I believe we may have a great deal to discuss. Sincerely, Isabella Rossi, CEO, Nexus Dynamics." Anya stared at the screen, then at the check on her table, then back at the screen. The world, which had seemed to be shrinking around her, had just cracked wide open. Two offers lay before her. One was a golden cage, an offer of silence and security from the man who had tried to destroy her. The other was a key, a chance to re-enter the world that had cast her out, offered by the one person with the power to challenge her tormentor. The choice wasn't just about money versus career. It was about who she was going to be, the victim who took the payoff or the fighter who re-entered the arena. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but for the first time in 5 years, it was joined by something else, a flicker of defiant, dangerous hope. The headquarters of Nexus Dynamics was not a fortress of power. It was a biosphere of innovation. Housed in a beautifully repurposed brick-and-beam warehouse in the meatpacking district, the space rejected the cold, intimidating aesthetic favored by its rival Ethelred Analytics. Sunlight streamed through massive arched windows, illuminating open-concept workspaces, where teams of engineers, designers, and ethicists huddled in vibrant discussion. The air hummed with a quiet, focused energy, smelling of coffee old brick and the faint, clean scent of active servers. It was a world Anya had thought was lost to her forever, and walking through it felt like drawing a breath after years of being underwater. Isabella Rossi was not waiting for her in a throne room of a corner office. She met Anya in a glass-walled meeting nook, furnished with comfortable armchairs, shelves of well-read books, and a simple wooden table where a pot of steaming jasmine tea sat between 2 ceramic cups. Isabella, with her sharp, kind eyes and an aura of unforced authority, stood and offered a hand. Her handshake was firm, her welcome genuine. "Anya, I'm so glad you came," she said, her voice possessing a warm resonance. "Please sit. Tea." "Thank you, Ms. Rossi." Anya said, her nerves a tightly wound coil in her stomach. "Isabella," she corrected smoothly, pouring the fragrant pale gold liquid. "We're a bit less formal here. As I mentioned in my email, I'm familiar with your early work. Your doctoral papers on ethical guardrails in machine learning were required reading for my R&D teams. What you were proposing back then, it wasn't just code. It was a philosophy, the idea that a user's dignity was as important as their data." Isabella leaned back, her gaze analytical but compassionate. "I've been in this game a long time. I've seen brilliant people get crushed by corporate politics. But what happened to you? The speed and ferocity of it always felt disproportionate. It wasn't just discredit, it was annihilation. I never believed the official story. The consortium had very deep pockets and a powerful narrative," Anya said, the old bitterness, a familiar taste. "It was my word against theirs." "And your word was the truth," Isabella stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "Which brings me to the present. Word travels in our world, Anja. A friend of mine, a venture capitalist with a penchant for overly expensive duck, was at Aurelia the other night. He described a scene where Damien Rochester, a man who considers no a personal affront, was systematically dismantled, in flawless high German." A faint, weary smile touched Anya's lips. "He made some assumptions. Damien's entire empire is built on assumptions." Isabella countered, her expression hardening slightly. "He assumes everyone is weaker, less intelligent, and ultimately for sale. When I heard the name of the waitress was Anya Schmidt, the universe suddenly made a terrible poetic kind of sense. The ghost of ethical AI serving its greatest monster." She paused, letting the weight of the statement settle. "That's why I'm here," Anya admitted. "I've spent 5 years trying to be invisible, and he wouldn't allow it." "He can't stand anything he doesn't control," Isabella affirmed, "which is why Nexus is launching a direct challenge. We're building something new, codenamed Project Prometheus. It's not just another AI, it's an entirely new paradigm. Its core architecture will be built on principles of absolute transparency, user-controlled privacy, and algorithmic accountability. We intend to make the black box model of companies like Ethelred obsolete by proving that ethics and profitability aren't mutually exclusive." Isabella leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Anya's. The air grew still. This project needs a leader for its soul, a head of ethical AI and accountability, not a philosopher to write papers, but a builder to embed these principles into every line of code. It needs someone with the technical brilliance to design it, the moral authority to champion it, and the personal courage to defend it against men like Damien Rochester. Anya's heart hammered against her ribs. This was more than a job. It was a resurrection. "I want you to lead it." "Anya," Isabella said, her voice unwavering. "Come back to the world that wronged you. We'll give you the team, the resources, and the full backing of this company. We will not just give you a platform. We will help you take back your name. I've already had our legal team look into the Labyrinth Consortium. We think we can subpoena their original charter and funding documents. I have a very strong suspicion about what they'll show." "A suspicion?" Anya asked, her voice barely a whisper. "A near certainty," Isabella clarified. She slid a tablet across the table. It displayed a complex flow chart of shell corporations and investment firms. The Labyrinth project was sponsored by a consortium called Viridian Data Partners. Viridian was a shell company funded entirely by a venture capital firm named Argent Capital. In its early years, Argent Capital had a very narrow portfolio. In fact, for the first 2 years of its existence, it provided seed money to only one fledgling startup. She tapped the screen, and a final name appeared connected to all the others. Ethelred Analytics. The world didn't just tilt, it inverted. The fragmented, painful pieces of her past slammed into place with sickening clarity. The anonymous third party siphoning her data, the vicious, well-funded smear campaign, the silencing of her professor. It wasn't just corporate malfeasance. It was a targeted assassination of her career, orchestrated to steal the foundation of her work. "He built his company on my research." Anya breathed the realization, a wave of ice and fire. "My algorithms, my ethical framework. He stole it and corrupted it." "He stole the engine and threw out the brakes," Isabella confirmed grimly. "And we are going to prove it. But we can't do it without you. The creator of the original code is the only one who can definitively identify its stolen ghost in his machine." Anya looked from Isabella's determined face to the world outside the window. She thought of the check on her kitchen table, Damien's $250 offer. It wasn't hush money. It was his final arrogant insult, the price he put on her life's work, on her very identity. The choice before her was no longer about security versus career. It was about justice versus surrender. A lifetime of suppressed fire roared to life in her chest. "I accept," she said, her voice imbued with a strength she hadn't felt in 5 years. Isabella Rossi smiled, a brilliant, genuine smile of victory. "Excellent. Let's get you your name back." Anya didn't just email her refusal. That would have been too easy, too impersonal. This required a final, definitive act. She called Damien Rochester's executive assistant, her voice a calm and steady counterpoint to the thunder in her heart, and requested a face-to-face meeting. The sheer audacity of the request must have piqued his predatory curiosity, because he granted it for that very afternoon. He was, she knew, expecting her to grovel for a higher price. Walking into Damien Rochester's office was like stepping into the heart of a glacier. The room was immense, a monument to sterile power. The floors were polished black marble that reflected the cold grey sky. The walls were unadorned, save for a single brutally abstract painting that seemed to radiate anxiety. His desk was a monolithic slab of dark granite, and behind it, a floor-to-ceiling panoramic window offered a god's-eye view of Manhattan, laying the city out like a map to be conquered. Damien stood before the window, a dark silhouette against the sprawling metropolis, his hands clasped behind his back. He turned as she entered, a faint, condescending smile playing on his lips. Ms. Schmidt, he said, his voice smooth as chilled steel. An unexpected pleasure. I trust you've had time to consider my generous offer. Have you come to your senses, or perhaps you're here to haggle? I might be persuaded to go to 300 if your apology is convincing enough. Anya walked across the silent, cavernous space, her footsteps echoing softly on the marble. She stopped before his massive desk and, with a deliberate, steady hand, placed the cashier's check and the voided, ripped NDA on its pristine surface. "The offer is rejected," she stated, her voice clear and devoid of any tremor. "It wasn't generous, Mr. Rochester. It was an admission of guilt with a price tag attached." He actually chuckled, a short, dry, humorless sound. "Brave words. Foolish, but brave. You're in no position to be so proud. That money," he gestured dismissively at the check, "would solve a great many of your pressing family problems. I know all about them." The threat was veiled, but unmistakable. "My problems, as you call them, are the cost of love and loyalty. Concepts your researchers probably struggle to quantify." Anya countered, her eyes locking with his. "I'm not here to discuss your blood money. I'm here to inform you of a new market development, a professional courtesy. And what development could a disgraced researcher and unemployed waitress possibly bring to my attention?" He sneered, leaning back in his chair, the picture of untouchable arrogance. As of this morning, Anja began letting each word land with precision. "I have accepted the position of head of ethical AI and accountability at Nexus Dynamics." The smug amusement evaporated from Damien's face. It was as if a mask had cracked. He sat up straighter, his eyes narrowing into slits of disbelief and fury. "You're working for Rossi." "I am," Anya confirmed, a cold wave of satisfaction washing over her. "And my first official undertaking will be Project Prometheus. Its mandate is to build the world's first truly transparent AI. To do that, my team and I will be conducting a full-spectrum audit of prevailing industry data practices to establish a baseline for our superior ethical protocols. And of course, we'll have to start with our chief competitor." She let a small, sharp smile touch her lips. "That's you." She saw a muscle jump in his jaw. He was silent, his mind clearly racing, processing this new, impossible reality. She took a step closer to the desk, leaning forward, slightly claiming the power in the room. "We're going to be particularly interested in the datasets your company acquired between 2019 and 2020. We'll be looking for anomalies, for unique algorithmic signatures that might have been misappropriated. For instance, from a certain high-profile academic project that collapsed under mysterious circumstances. I believe it was called Labyrinth." She said the name, and Damien Rochester went perfectly still. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy pale sheen. The arrogance, the power, the cruelty, it all collapsed inward, leaving behind the cold, stark terror of a king who has just heard the executioner's axe being sharpened. "You can't prove a thing." He whispered the words, utterly hollow, a ghost of his former authority. "5 years ago you were right," Anya said, her voice now ringing with the clarity of absolute power. "I was just one woman, a researcher with a theory you could easily bury. But today, I am an executive with the full legal, financial, and computational backing of a multi-billion-dollar corporation that has been waiting for a reason to tear your empire down. You saw a waitress and assumed she was weak. You saw a problem and assumed it could be bought. You were wrong on both counts." She straightened up, turning to leave. With her hand on the handle of the massive office door, she looked back at him one last time. He looked small behind his enormous desk, a man drowning in a sea of his own making. In the restaurant, you called me a useless automaton. You mused that the most complex programs run silently in the background. You were right about that, at least. She said, her voice a final devastating whisper. Consider me the diagnostic program you never knew was running. And I've just found a fatal error in your system. Welcome to the crash, Mr. Rochester. Anya Schmidt walked out of the office, the heavy door clicking shut behind her, sealing him in his silent marble tomb. She stepped into the elevator, and as it descended, she didn't look back. She was no longer a ghost of the past. She was the architect of his future. The war had begun, and the checkmate was already in sight. Anya's story is a powerful reminder that dignity isn't determined by your job title, and strength isn't measured by your bank account. It's about the fire you carry inside. Damien Rochester saw Waitress. He was blind to the brilliant mind and a warrior's spirit standing right in front of him. He thought his power and money made him untouchable, but he learned that true power lies in integrity, courage, and the refusal to be silenced. How many of us have felt underestimated or dismissed in our own lives? Anya's journey from a quiet waitress to a powerful executive is a testament to fighting back, not with anger, but with intelligence and grace. She didn't just shut him down, she rose above him. What would you have done in her situation? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own inner strength. And of course, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next story of incredible real-life drama and triumph. Thank you for listening.